Hello, hello. Welcome back to No Me Callo. I won't stay quiet. I'm your host, Lomelin, and I want to start this episode with a question. At what point were we sold the idea that growing up was supposed to feel like a victory? Because if I'm honest, there are days when growing up feels more like grief. And I'm not just talking about getting older, because getting older is easy. It happens once a year. You blow out your candles, take a few pictures, someone asks you how you're feeling, and you respond with some version of, I can't believe I'm already 29. But growing up is something else entirely. Growing up is waking up on a random Tuesday, looking at yourself in the mirror while brushing your teeth, and then realizing you're not the same person you were 5 years ago. Or it's finding a picture on your phone from 2019 and staring at it a little longer than necessary. And not because you're nostalgic, but because you're genuinely asking yourself, who was that person? Because she looks like you, she has your smile, your voice, your same eyes, but she thinks differently. Dreams differently, loves differently. And honestly, if the two of you could sit down and have a coffee together, I think you'd had a pretty interesting conversation. Because that's the strange thing about growing up. It doesn't happen all at once. There isn't an alarm. You don't get a notification on your phone that says, update complete, you are now a fully functional adult. If only, right? But there isn't a letter that shows up at your door saying, congrats, as of today, you are officially a new version of yourself. It just happens. One day you're worried about turning in an assignment on time, and then the next, you're Googling symptoms that you absolutely should not be Googling at 11 o'clock at night. And I know we've all been there. One day you're asking your parents what you should do, and the next you realize that they've been improvising this entire time too. One day you have a long list of things you want to accomplish before you turn 30, and the next you're renegotiating that list because life had other plans. Because let's be honest, I think a lot of us grew up believing there would be a moment when we'd finally feel like adults. That moment when we'd say, I've made it. I finally understand life. I know exactly who I am now. And I don't know about you, but I'm still waiting for that moment. Because it turns out being an adult is a very strange experience. And nobody talks about that. So the third episode of this series is called The Loneliness of Growing Up. So you know what to do. Get comfortable, grab your coffee, your cafecito, your glass of wine, or a cold beer, and get ready to chismear with me. Nobody talks about getting excited over a new vacuum cleaner. Like, when did that happen? At what point did Friday night plans become less exciting than someone canceling so you could stay at home in sweatpants? And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying growing up is a bad thing. I actually think growing older is a privilege. But I also think we can admit that it's weird, really weird, because while you're busy living your life, life is quietly changing you without asking for permission, without a warning. One day you just realize you don't listen to the same music anymore. You don't wear the same clothes. You don't have the same group of friends. Your favorite conversations are different. Your priorities have changed. And the most unsettling part is that at that time, you can't even remember when it happened. And I think about that a lot. About all the last moments we didn't know were the last. The last time you played outside with your childhood friends. The last time your mom picked you up. The last time you saw someone before they slowly became a stranger. The last time you felt completely certain about the future. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Growing up is full of goodbyes that don't look like goodbyes. And I think that's where the loneliness comes in. Because the loneliness of growing up doesn't always look like being alone. Sometimes it looks like being the only person in your friend group who still has no idea what they're doing with their life. Sometimes it looks like sitting at a table surrounded by people and wondering, am I the only one who feels this way? Sometimes it looks like having a full life and still feeling like something shifted. And I want to talk about that because I feel like we're all having the same conversation in silence. Especially those of us in our 20s and 30s. We're all pretending a little bit. And I know that sounds harsh, but think about it. We're all saying, I'm good, taking it one day at a time, work's been busy, everything's fine. While internally we're asking ourselves, am I where I'm supposed to be? Am I making the right decisions? Why does it feel like everyone else got a map except me? Because that's another thing nobody tells you. You'll never feel so lost and so responsible at the same time. And that combination is exhausting because when you're a child, someone else makes the important decisions. But when you're an adult, it's you. You decide where you live. You decide who to love. You decide when to leave. And you decide which dreams are worth chasing. And the scariest part is that nobody can guarantee that you're making the right choice. You just choose and you wait and you choose again. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. And then you have to try again. That's growing up. And it's not a straight line. It's a series of decisions made by a tired person who's doing the best that they can. Because some days getting up, going to work, answering emails, paying bills, and continuing to believe that good things can still happen, that's enough. And we deserve a little more credit for that. And maybe that's what has surprised me the most about growing up. Not the loneliness of being physically alone, but the loneliness of realizing that no one can live your life for you. No one can heal for you. No one can make your decisions for you. No one can become the person you're meant to be. That's your job. And there's something deeply lonely about that. But there's also something incredibly powerful about it because it means that even if you don't have all the answers, you still got to keep writing your story. And maybe that's the conversation I really want to have today. Not about how hard it is to grow up, but about how we keep doing it anyway, even though no one ever taught us how. Because if we're honest, I think most of us are still kids trying to figure out what we're supposed to do. We just happen to have credit cards now and a lower back pain. When I was a child, I thought adults had everything figured out. I truly believe that. I thought there were a specific moment in life when something just clicked. Like the day you turned 21, you automatically received the secret handbook that said, "Welcome to adulthood. Here are all the answers you've been waiting for." I thought my mom knew exactly what she was doing. That when she told me everything's gonna be okay, it was because she genuinely knew everything was gonna be okay. I thought my teachers had answers to everything. The people in important positions never doubted themselves. The doctors were never scared. The leaders were always confident in their decisions. The married people knew exactly how to make love last forever. And that adults, in general, walked through life with the level of certainty that I didn't have yet. Growing up looked very different in my head. By 27, I thought you were supposed to have your life figured out. Maybe a house, a partner, a career, 2 kids, a dog, a savings account, and an impressive level of emotional stability. Funny, right? Because nobody tells you that you can have that career and still feel completely lost. That you can be in love and still feel lonely. That you can accomplish goals you spent years chasing and still find yourself asking, what now? Nobody tells you there are people who look like they have everything together but still cry in their car before walking into work. That there are marriages held together by difficult conversations. That there are parents who go to sleep every night wondering if they are doing a good job. That there are successful people who still struggle with imposter syndrome. Because today, when I look around, I realize something. We're all improvising, all of us. The 40-year-old woman who looks like she's having everything together. The successful 50-year-old man. The person who just got a promotion, the friend who got engaged, the person who posts perfect airport pictures every other week. Everyone is figuring out as they go. Everyone is trying to figure out how to live a life that they've never lived before. Everyone is making decisions without incomplete information. And there is something incredibly comforting about that. But there is also something really sad about it, because it means nobody is coming to rescue you. And I think that has been one of the hardest things I had to accept. Because when you're little, there's always someone. If you fall, someone picks you up. If you're scared, someone turns on the light. If you don't know what to do, someone makes a decision for you. But one day, without realizing it, you become that person for someone else. And nobody asks you if you're ready. It just happens. There comes a moment when you become the person you were always waiting for. And that is terrifying. Because when you're in your 20s, you still think, someday someone will tell me what to do. Someday everything will make sense. Someday I'll finally feel ready. But then you turn 25, then 27, then 29. And then you realize that someday never actually comes, because the truth is, nobody really knows exactly what they're doing. We just become better at making decisions. We learn how to live with uncertainty. We learn how to trust ourselves. We learn how to fall and how to get back up a little faster. And honestly, there are days when I feel completely capable of handling anything. And there are other days when I feel like a little girl wearing someone else's jacket, hoping nobody notices it. I'm still trying to figure out how any of this works. Because let's be honest, when are we actually supposed to learn how to be adults? Was there a class I missed? Because there are days when I'm leading meetings, making important decisions, helping other people navigate difficult moments in their lives. And then I get home and I find myself staring at the ceiling, wondering if my life is actually going in the right direction. The duality of growing up is incredible. You can feel extremely strong and completely lost on the same day. You can be so proud of the woman you've become and still miss the person you used to be. You can know exactly what you deserve and still question yourself when someone leaves. You can build a beautiful life and still wonder if you chose the right path. And maybe that's what being an adult really is. Not having all the answers, but learning how to live with the questions. Because if there's one thing I've realized lately, it's this. Confidence is not waking up one day and saying, I finally understand life. No. Confidence is saying, I have no idea what I'm doing, but I trust that I'll figure it out when I get there. And honestly, there are still days when I don't feel qualified for this position. There are still days when I wish I could call the version of my mom from the day when I was 10 and ask her, do you feel this way too? Because now I suspect she did. Now I suspect that a lot of the time she told me everything's gonna be okay, she was also trying to convince herself of that same thing. And I think that is one of the most human conversations we can have. Accepting that growing up doesn't mean you stop feeling afraid. It means moving forward even when you're afraid. It means slowly becoming the person you needed when you were younger, even on the days when you still don't feel completely ready to be her. And honestly, I think one of the things that has surprised me the most about growing up is realizing how different my life is from the one I imagined when I was younger. I am 29 years old, and if you had asked the 15-year-old me what life would look like at this age, I would have answered immediately saying, I would be married, I would have 2 kids, probably a house, maybe a dog, and I would definitely feel like I have everything figured out. Because that's what I saw, that's what I was taught to expect. That's what it looked like everyone around me was doing. And nobody told me that at 29, I would still be discovering who I am. Nobody told me I would change careers and feel like I was starting over. Nobody told me that some people I thought would be in my life forever wouldn't be. Nobody told me there would be loves that would change me even if they didn't stay. Nobody told me that growing up would mean saying goodbye to so many versions of myself. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying this from a place of sadness because I actually like the woman I am becoming. I am so proud of her. I am proud of the way she gets back after life surprises her. I am proud of the way she continues choosing herself. I am proud of every time she has to start all over. But I would be lying if I said I have never sat there and wondered, what would a 15-year-old Jessica think if she saw me today? And I think she would be confused. I think she would ask, wait, you're still not married? You don't have any kids yet? You're still trying to figure out what you want for the rest of your life? And honestly, I think she would also be impressed because 15-year-old Jessica never could have imagined everything we would have survived to get here. She never imagined the goodbyes, the disappointments, the changes, the times we would have to rebuild ourselves. Because when you're a child, you make plans based on the best possible versions of the future. You don't think about obstacles, you don't think about pain, and you don't think about the things that have to break so other things can be built. You just think, by 30, I'll have arrived. And now I realize nobody really arrives. We just keep moving forward. And I think there is something incredibly freeing about accepting that. Because for a long time, I feel like I was falling behind. I watched people get engaged, have children, buy homes, celebrate anniversaries. And a small part of me wondered, did I miss something? But the more I talk to people, the more I realize that everyone feels this way. The only difference is that some people say it aloud and others don't. Because there are married people wondering if they made the right choice. There are parents wondering who they were before becoming parents. There are professional, successful people wondering if they sacrificed too much to get where they are. We're all looking at someone else's life thinking they figured out how it works. Meanwhile, they are doing the exact same thing. So yes, I am 29 years old, and my life looks nothing like the life I have imagined. But maybe that isn't the tragedy I thought it was. Because the truth is, the life I imagined at 15 was created by a girl who didn't know the world yet. She didn't know love. She didn't know loss. She didn't know resilience. She didn't know the woman she would become. And if I could sit across from her today, I think I would tell her, no, we're not where you thought we would be, but here we are. And after everything we have lived through, that deserves to be celebrated too. Because maybe growing up isn't about becoming the person you imagined when you were a child. And maybe growing up is about meeting a version of yourself you never could have imagined. And honestly, I think I like her so much more. And I want to talk about something that took me a long time to understand this year. You can miss someone who is still alive. You can grieve someone who is still posting Instagram stories. You can feel the loss of someone who simply decided to become a stranger. And I think that is one of the hardest parts about growing up, because when you're young, we are taught how to say goodbye to death. We learn that some people leave because life ends. We learn how to mourn when someone is gone. But nobody teaches us how to say goodbye to the people who are still here. Nobody teaches us how to move on from a friendship that lasted, 10 years. Nobody teaches us what to do when someone who was part of your everyday life is suddenly no longer there. And nobody prepares you for that moment when you realize that some people came into your life for a chapter, not the entire story. And I think that realization can hurt in a way that we don't really talk about enough. Because sometimes there isn't a big fight, there isn't a dramatic ending, there isn't one specific moment where you can say, this is when everything changed. Sometimes people just slowly become less present. The conversation becomes less frequent. The plans stop happening. The inside jokes become memories. And then one day you realize, wait, when did we stop being so close? And that question can stay with you for a long time. And this year, I found myself thinking about that a lot. About all the different versions of myself that exist in other people. Because there is someone who knows the Jessica from high school, someone who knows the Jessica from college, someone who knows the Jessica who was in love, someone who knows the Jessica who was heartbroken, someone who knows the Jessica who thought she would stay at the same job forever. And the truth is, none of those women fully exist anymore. They're all pieces of me. They're all part of my story, but they are not who I am today. And I think that's the another strange part about growing up. Realizing that people hold memories of versions of you that you have already outgrown. And sometimes growing up means accepting that not everyone gets to meet the newest version of you. Not everyone gets to see who you become after everything you've survived. And that's okay. Because sometimes people were meant to know you in a specific season. They were meant to walk beside you during a certain chapter. And when that chapter ends, it doesn't mean the relationship wasn't meaningful. It doesn't mean the love wasn't real. And it doesn't mean that the memories didn't matter. It just means the story changed. And I think that's one of the hardest things about growing up. Learning that something can be beautiful and still be over. Someone can have been important and still not be part of your future. A friendship can have changed you and still have a final page. Our relationship can have been real and still not be forever. And maybe the hardest goodbyes aren't always the ones where someone leaves. Sometimes they're the ones where someone stays alive, but no longer belongs in the same place in your life. And learning how to accept that, I think that's the part of growing up too. And we need to talk about this because I feel like nobody is being completely honest about your 20s. We were told that they were supposed to be the best years of our lives. The best? Really? At what point? Because my 20s have been a combination of existential crises, therapy, heartbreaks, taxes, grief, figuring out who I am, losing people, finding myself, losing myself again. And don't get me wrong, my 20s have also been beautiful. But I also think there is an enormous amount of pressure to enjoy this stage of life. Like we're supposed to constantly be traveling, finding the love of our lives, building an empire, healing all of our trauma, going to the gym 5 times a week, drinking enough water, reading 12 books a year, having a successful career, maintaining friendships, being emotionally available, and somehow also having a perfect social life. Is anyone else tired? Because I am. And sometimes I feel like we're living in a time where everyone is expected to be the best version of themselves all the time. Like we're supposed to be constantly improving, constantly achieving, constantly becoming. And somewhere along the way, we forget that we are human beings, not projects that need to be fixed. And I think part of the loneliness of growing up is feeling like everyone else is ahead of you. Like there is an invisible race happening and everyone else got the instructions except you. You look around and start asking yourself, should I have already been married? Should I have kids by now? Should I be making more money? Should I have my entire life figured out? Am I failing behind? And the answer is, I don't know. Because the older I get, the more convinced I become that there is no single right answer. There is no universal timeline. There is no magical age where everything suddenly makes sense. Some people find love at 22. Some people find it at 35. Some people know exactly what career they want at 18. Some people completely change their path at 40. Some people become parents young. Some people decide they don't want children. Some people buy a house. Some people travel the world. Some people are rebuilding their lives after losing everything. And none of those paths are wrong. But somehow we have convinced ourselves that there is one specific version of success, one specific picture of what a good life looks like. And if our life doesn't match that picture, we start questioning ourselves. We start wondering if we made mistakes, if we wasted time, if we missed our opportunity. But maybe we didn't miss anything. Maybe we're just living a different story. And I think that's something I had to remind myself over and over again. Because when I was younger, I thought life was about arriving somewhere, getting to a certain age, reaching a certain milestone, checking certain boxes. But now I think life is less about arriving and more about becoming. Becoming someone you respect, becoming someone you can be proud of, becoming someone who knows how to pick herself up when things don't go as planned. Because the truth is, nobody talks enough about how lonely it can feel to be in transition. When the old version of yourself no longer fits, but the new version of you hasn't fully arrived yet. That in-between space can feel incredibly uncomfortable. And you're not who you used to be, but you're not exactly who you're becoming either. You're somewhere in the middle. And that middle can feel lonely. But maybe the middle is also where the most growth happens. Maybe that uncomfortable space is where we learn the most about ourselves. Maybe that's where we discover what we actually want, not what we were told to want. And maybe that's the real purpose of our 20s. Not to have everything figured out, but to have the courage to keep asking questions, to keep trying, to keep learning, to keep becoming. Because maybe the goal was never to have the perfect life by 30. Maybe the goal was to create a life that actually feels like yours. And there is a quote I heard a few years ago that said, "Your home will not always be a place. Sometimes it will have to be a person, and eventually it will have to be you." And I think that perfectly summarizes growing up, because there comes a moment when you realize you cannot keep searching in other people for the things you need to give yourself. You cannot expect someone else to make you feel enough. You cannot expect a relationship to complete you. You cannot expect a job to give you your identity, because all of those things can go away. And then what's left? You, just you. And I know that can sound sad, but honestly, it's freeing, because it means that no matter what happens, you will always have yourself. Although honestly, learning how to be with myself has been one of the hardest things I have ever done. Because when you finally sit in silence with yourself, you discover all the conversations you have been avoiding. And nobody tells you that one day your parents will get older. Nobody tells you that you will start to understand them. Nobody tells you that there will be calls you will no longer receive. Nobody tells you that some friendships will have an expiration date. Nobody tells you that the love of your life may not stay. Nobody tells you that you will change your dreams. Nobody tells you that there will be goals you achieve and still feel empty afterward. Nobody tells you that the healing also hurts. Nobody tells you that sometimes the life you ask for arrives disguised as a loss. And maybe that is why growing up feels so lonely. Because we are constantly saying goodbye to something, to someone, or to some version of ourselves. So if you feel lonely today, if you feel like everyone else seems to know exactly where they are going except you, if you are starting over, if you just lost someone, if a friendship is hurting you, if you miss the person you used to be, if you're afraid of the future, I want to tell you something. You are not behind. You did not miss any lesson, and you did not ruin your life. You are doing the best that you can with the version of yourself that exists today, and that is enough. Maybe the loneliness of growing up is not a punishment. Maybe it's an invitation to get to know yourself, to build a life that truly belongs to you, to stop asking for permission to become who you are. And maybe, just maybe, the goal was never to avoid loneliness. Maybe the goal was to learn that you can survive it. And one day you will wake up and realize that it does not feel as heavy anymore, because you finally learned something nobody taught you, that being with yourself can also feel like being at home. And as always, I want to recommend you a book, and this one is called Tiny Beautiful Things by Cheryl Strayed. And this book connects deeply with the idea that growing up doesn't always feel like a victory. A lot of the time, it feels like learning how to live with loss, uncertainty, and the questions that never fully get answered. Through honest and deeply human letters, the author explores heartbreak, unexpected changes, new beginnings, and the reality that life rarely looks the way we imagined it would when we were younger. And I think this book and the loneliness of growing up share the same message, that it's okay not to have all the answers, that we're all improvising a little bit, and that even if our lives don't look the way we dreamed they would when we were 15, that doesn't mean they can't still be beautiful. So I definitely recommend it. And before I go, I want to leave you with one final reflection. And I think a lot about all the versions of ourselves that we left behind along the way. The little girl who was convinced that by 29, she would have her entire life figured out. The teenager who couldn't wait to grow up. The person we were before the heartbreak, before that goodbye, before that career change, before that moment when someone looked at us and we realized, I don't recognize you anymore. Because growing up comes with a price. And I think the price is this. You never become the person you used to be again. And sometimes that hurts more than we are willing to admit. Because there are nights when I don't miss a person. I miss who I was when I was with them. There are moments when I'm not crying because of what I lost. I'm crying because of the version of myself that left with it. And I think that is what makes growing up feel so lonely. That we're constantly surviving small goodbyes. The last time someone told you I love you and truly meant it. The last time a place felt like home. The last time you felt completely understood. The last time someone knew a version of you that no longer exists. And the hardest part is that most of that time, we don't even know it's the last time. We simply live the moment and keep moving forward. Until one day, years later, we find an old photograph, hear a song, or drive down a familiar street and think, I miss that person so much. And then we realize that person was us. I am 29 years old, and if I'm completely honest, there are days when I'm still waiting to become the woman I thought I would be. But maybe that has been my mistake all along, waiting to become someone else, when the person I have been fighting for all these years has always been me, the version of me who survived, the one who stayed when others left, the one who learned how to start all over, the one who kept believing in love after having her heart broken, the one who still looks forward toward the future with a little bit of fear and a little bit of hope, because maybe that is what growing up really is, learning how to hold two things at the same time. Grief and gratitude, sadness and hope, nostalgia and the desire to keep moving forward. So if you feel alone today, if you feel like everyone else has moved ahead while you are still trying to pick up the pieces of a life that didn't turn out the way you imagined, I want you to remember this. You are not behind. You are not missing your life. Your life is happening right now, in this moment, in the middle of this uncertainty, in the middle of the questions, in the middle of all the versions of yourself you had to let go in order to become who you are today. And I know sometimes it hurts. I know there are nights when you wish you could go back and hug the person you used to be. Tell them that everything's going to change, that they will lose people they love, that they will have to start over more times than they ever expected, that there will be moments when they feel deeply alone. But I also want to tell you this. We made it. Not in the way we thought we would, but we made it. And maybe that is enough. So thank you for reminding me once again that none of us are doing this perfectly. We are just here, trying one day at a time. And remember, someday the version of you that exists today will be someone you deeply miss. So before you chase the next version of yourself, don't forget to embrace the one who did everything possible to get you here. In the description of this episode, you'll find the Amazon link with the complete list of books mentioned on No Me Callo, I Won't Stay Quiet, from the very first episode up to today's. And don't forget that every Friday there's a new episode waiting for you. The fourth episode of this series is called The Permission to Change Your Mind About Who You Are. Because after talking about the loneliness of growing up, there is a conversation we inevitably have to have. Who told you that you had to be the same person forever? When did we decide that changing our minds meant like we failed? Because I think many of us carry that weight of old versions of ourselves. The career we said we wanted at 18. The person who we swore we would end up with. The city we thought we would live in. The dreams that no longer represent us who we are, but we continue chasing because at some point someone expected us to. And then an uncomfortable question appears. What happens when you no longer want the life you worked so hard to build? What happens when you realize you have changed? And what happens if the person you are becoming looks nothing like the person you promised you would be? So in the next episode, we're going to talk about something I think we all need to hear. The permission to change your mind about who you are. Because maybe growing up isn't about staying the same. Maybe growing up is about having the courage to say, that was true for me at that time, but it's not true for me anymore. And honestly, I think there is something incredibly brave about that. So if you ever felt guilty about starting over, changing your dreams, walking away from people, or becoming someone your younger self wouldn't recognize, the next episode is for you. Because maybe the greatest act of self-love is not finding yourself. Maybe it is giving yourself permission to introduce yourself again. So don't miss it. You were listening to No Me Callo, I Won't Stay Quiet. I'm your host, Jessica Lomelin. Until next time.